Hello again. When we left off last time, we had a functioning but rather simple workflow based on a three-step process to prepare a quote for garage door installation. But what happens if the process itself is different in different situations? For example, what if a three-step process is perfect for residential customers but not for commercial customers? What if a commercial customer needs a four-step process or even a five-step process? What then? In iPhora App Builder, there are two ways to handle this. One way is to simply add an extra button to the first task node. Notice that we've created two versions of the workflow. The one immediately below the task node is for residential customers. The one to the right is for commercial customers. And there are now two buttons that will appear on step 1. One is for the residential submission, and the other is for the commercial submission. Notice that each button maps to a different workflow path. This means that the Task 1 performer selects the path by clicking on the associated button. This is how the two buttons will appear in the form when a user actually tries to do step 1. Notice there's a residential button and a commercial button. It all makes it very simple for the user. And now for the other way of handling a different workflow path. This is to use a decision node such as the one shown here. A decision node automatically decides which path to take based on some piece of information in the workflow document. In this case, if a certain field contains the word commercial, then the workflow path on the right is used. Otherwise, the residential path is used. So, let's assume that we just redid the entire workflow using a decision node. We're now going to take a look at how that was done. Here we are in iPhora App Builder. Let's open the Garage Door RFQ app. Of course, we first have to unpublish it so we can edit it. Note that we have already made a few changes to this app in order to make it work with the decision node. Let's start by looking at the form. This form is almost the same as it was in the original workflow. The only difference is that we added a field named Customer Type. This allows the sales rep to select either residential or commercial. Let's look at the properties of this field. As you can see, the widget name is Customer Type, and it is accessible by other app blocks. This field is a combo box field, which means that it displays a selection of choices for the user to select from. In this case, there are two possible choices: residential or commercial, and the default value that we selected is residential. So, now that we have a way to specify the customer type, let's take a look at the process. Here is the process. Notice that we have made a lot of changes. Task 1 is still the same. But then it encounters the decision node we were talking about earlier. This node examines the value of the customer type field and uses the current value of that field to determine which path to take. If it is residential, then the process flows into the steps immediately below the decision node, which are exactly the same as the steps in the original workflow. But if the customer type is commercial, then the process flows into the steps on the right, which include an additional task, making it a longer workflow. Let's take a look at the properties of the decision node. The decision rules determine which path the workflow follows. This is the rule that is currently being applied. Let's rebuild this rule from scratch so you can understand how it works. We are now going to create a rule to check if the customer type field is equal to the word commercial. Here's how we do it. We make sure that the condition is set to when. We select customer type as the field. Then for the comparison operator, we set equal. And then for value, we type the word commercial. Then we click on the plus button to add this to the list. Note that you can add more rules if needed. By using the and or conditions to combine rules, you can create some extremely complex rules. But in most cases, a single rule that checks the value of one field is all that you need. After specifying the decision rules, we then specify which path applies when the rule is true and when it is false. In this case, if true, the workflow exits the decision node on the right, and otherwise, it exits on the bottom. And that is how you use a decision node to change the path of a workflow. Now let's put it into practice and see how it works for an actual user. We are now logged in as Jill Hill, the sales rep. Our workflow has already been published and it is ready for use. Jill is going to create two new workflows, one for a residential customer and one for a commercial customer. This RFQ is for a residential customer. Notice that residential is already selected by default in the customer type field. We will now fill in the rest of the form. Okay, and the new workflow for customer Peggy Lake has been created. Next, we are going to create an RFQ for a commercial customer. This time, we have to select commercial as the customer type. And then we can fill in the rest of the form. And the new RFQ has been created. Now let's log in as John Hill, who is the person who does step 2. There, we are now logged in as John. Let's open the app. First, we are going to look at the RFQ for the residential customer. Here it is. Notice that it is 33% done, which makes sense because only the first step of a 3-step process has been completed. Now let's look at the RFQ for a commercial customer. In this case, it is 25% done, which also makes sense because this is now a 4-step process and only the first step has been completed. So by using the decision node, we were able to accommodate 2 different sets of steps in the same workflow. This is what makes the decision node so useful. If you would like to know more about business process automation and iPhora solutions, just visit iPhora.io.